Real Estate Rewired.
Welcome to Real Estate Rewired, AI with a Heart with Gus Waite, brought to you by the Independent Brokers Collective. And today I couldn't be more thrilled than to be with Mitchell Adelstein, who's his guest. He spent 20 years as a commercial broker and 25 years running his own shop. Mitchell is a founder of Capstone Real Estate, where he's built a portfolio spanning office, multifamily, shopping center, and currently managed over 2 million square feet of assets. He was also a partner in a hotel company that sold to the Pritzkers in 2011. After a recent $125 million sale, Mitchell redeployed the proceeds into office and multifamily assets in West Palm, and he's actively shifting his portfolio towards multifamily ownership. He's also spent the last 25 years teaching at Columbia, where he covers capital markets, deal structuring. These days, he co-teaches it with his son, where he does a mock transaction class where students negotiate live deals against real-world investors. Mitchell, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gus, for a very nice introduction. You encapsulated me in a nutshell. So
Okay.
Appreciate that.
I love that.
Yeah.
So listen, let's go right from this. So you've been a commercial broker for 20 years. You're running Capstone for 25. What's changed about the way you underwrite a deal today versus how you did it when you first got into the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. The market has evolved, and a lot of it has to do with technology. 25 years ago, we were using methods and tools to do analysis of real estate, and the packaging of that information and the dissemination of the information that was sent out into the capital markets was slow. It was encumbered. It would be sending out packages by mail, and it would take days and days for it to arrive. It would sit in a pile with information on someone's desk for them to underwrite a financing request or an equity investment. And then they would be perhaps phone calls and discussions about it. Today, we're able to instantaneously, disseminate a document using the tools that we have, and very quickly be able to get answers that we need for our underwriting. So it's become, the world has compressed, if you would. Decisions are required to be made faster, and we're using technology and information dissemination to get those answers faster.
So let me ask you that. This occurred to me, and you'll appreciate this. As you're saying this, I'm thinking of co-op packages I used to do, where, you needed to make 12 paper copies of a co-op package that was maybe 300 documents in each and get them to all these people. In your career, you've seen it go from analog to digital.
Exactly.
To now agentic.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, even to the point where documents that we put together are screened and pre-screened by AI modeling, so our writing is more efficient and the presentations are made more efficient. But the thing that hasn't changed, Gus, all due respect, is in the experience of the real estate entrepreneur. Nothing replaces 25 years of practicing experience, walking into a building, knowing what makes a good building and what makes a bad building. Those are things that you understand from past experience. And I'm not so sure there's an AI model out there that could capture that. So there's always going to be the need for the real estate entrepreneur, the real estate, investor to come to the table with their expertise in, the discipline, being candid.
Yeah. And I mean, what we're talking about is judgment, creativity, institutional knowledge, emotional intelligence in terms of being able to really identify what the seller and the buyer, as I don't have to tell you, Mitchell, a lot of times, yes, it's about the numbers, but when the ego thing gets involved and somebody wants to win an argument and it's kind of deciding how to structure that so that particular personality gets a win and the deal still goes through. Would that be accurate?
That's that's in fact one of the primary reasons why our class at Columbia has been so popular. It has a lot to do with the fact that we're teaching the anomaly of human interaction. It's one thing to analyze something on paper and be able to say that's the way it should be. It's something else when another party gets involved, right? Now you've got two individuals with different ideas. So I've learned in my career that you may have it all figured out, but at the end of the day, when you send it over to a potential equity partner or a lender, they're going to look at it the way that they do and say, this is the way we see your deal. So you have to be able to react to those types of, signals. So it's not an academic exercise when you look at a deal. It's always a matter of how will the market receive this? What is their path forward? And how do you be creative around it? So there's a lot of that truth to how we look at transactions.
So let me ask you that. Let's go to the school thing for a moment. So what do you think is the biggest gap for a student coming in on how they think a deal is going to go down? And then where's the gap in their knowledge of how it actually goes down?
Yeah, that's a fantastic segue. So again, with our class, we teach the roughly 100 students from Columbia University in the graduate school of architecture and planning in the area of real estate development. These are the tools you need to analyze the valuation of a commercial real estate project. These are the tools you need to size up the debt financing and put together some type of financing like an analysis. And these are the equity models we use to figure out returns. And this is how it is on paper. But then it all has to come down to the human interaction, the human negotiations. And inevitably, that's when the wheels come off the bus. And people find out that, micro things can change the major directions of a transaction. And it's inevitable that the students get up at the end of the class and say, well, we got smoked by the other team, and they realize that, it's a competitive market out there, and they have to, take the clues from the people they're negotiating with. And we try to teach them certain rules of engagement when it comes to negotiation. But there again, those are the things that you need to spend years in the saddle to learn,
Yeah, and I'm
skills of
curious.
negotiating.
Absolutely. So, Mitchell, I'm curious to this. So, when I was practicing real estate, I did not do well with the methodicals, right? So, in other words, I did a lot of corporate reload. So, if I had someone come in and say, hey, listen, the rent in this place is $1.82 a square foot, and the average market rate right now is $1.40. So, why? And I'm going, well, you're in the West Village and you're in the penthouse. You know what I mean? They didn't care. Are there certain types that you identify where like, okay, this person is a methodical or this person is a competitive, or do you have those like archetypes that you deal with?
That's a great question. I think the answer in my world is I always seem to know where they came from. And, if they're an institutional capital provider, they typically came up through the ranks from Wall Street or, credit company or bank culture. And they've been taught a certain way to look at things. And I kind of always try to understand from that perspective. I wouldn't say my adversary, but I like to know where they're coming from, because that often dictates, how they approach the transaction. Credit and banking culture is a lot different from Wall Street. And I've had many a transaction where they've been exceptionally difficult. And I look back and sure enough, they came from an institution or they learned their trade from an institution that was very tough to do business with. And it's almost comical. There are times where I've had, oh, geez, had I known they were coming from such and such, I would have taken a different approach here. And that has definitely been my experience.
Interesting. And so what would you say is the biggest obstacle that they present to you? Not naming names, but like what's the mindset on the other side and how do you overcome those sort of challenges? Like what do you need to bring to the table to get that done?
Yeah, look, sometimes, you do the best you can with certain types of debt lenders. You're hoping to close a transaction and, close on a $20-30 million financing. And you realize it's like you're batting your head against a wall, and you can either fight your way through it or you can call your next best lender and pivot quickly, because sometimes you may not get to the finish line. And that's a reality. There are certain times in my career that I had a lender or two where I just thought it was, unbearable. And I realized that their credit culture was not going to let them perform. And I quickly pivoted. And then I told them that we've already gone elsewhere. And that was the only resolution. I started my career in the consulting business, a long time ago. I was with a public accounting firm. And we spent a lot of time inside the organization of other people we work with, learning the cultures, learning how they saw the world. So I always try to put myself in the shoes of the party I'm negotiating with. And maybe that's because I'm a Libra. I don't know. But I always understand their nuances. So if I can have the knowledge to know where they're coming from, it helps me kind of get in front of it and work the process. But knowledge and of the process is very important, especially when you're borrowing debt, and just understanding, the lender's perspective, the equity investor's perspective, and what their needs are. Because inevitably they're selling it to somebody else, right? And it's not their decision. It's I have to go and tell my boss, and my boss has to tell the rating agencies, they have to go tell the B-piece market this. So it's always a matter of, you saying to them, I am empathetic and I know your plight. So let's figure this out together, as opposed to you saying to them, look, I don't care your problem, just close my loan. That's not going to help. But kind of saying, I get what you're dealing with there. How do we get behind this together to get to a solution? That's usually the best approach I find.
Love that. All right, I'm going to shift a little bit, Mitchell. So you're shifting towards multifamily ownership. What's driving that right now? Is it rent growth, financing terms, something else?
Well, the multifamily space has always been, quite frankly, the blue chip space to be in. The cost of debt is the lowest. There were reasons why in the past I had not been more involved in the multifamily space. I started my career doing multifamily development finance and hotel finance. And I kind of got into a place where I was buying distressed and opportunistic office buildings and shopping centers because after the great financial crisis of, 2008, that's where all the distress was in the office sector and in the retail sector. So, institutions were selling off defaulted mortgages on office buildings because they didn't want to take ownership. They just wanted to get rid of them. So those were really fantastic investment opportunities. At this point of the market cycle, the office sector has had a lot of challenges. We had COVID to deal with and downsizings and right sizings, and we've just gone through, a corporate shakeout with the recent, interest rate hikes and so forth. So the office sector has been tough, and you really need to have a long perspective on it. And the financing markets don't like commercial sector right now. They don't like office. They don't like retail. And multi has always been a much easier place to finance. The downside of multi is that there are low barriers to entry. You don't need to be that sophisticated in putting together complicated leases and understanding, more in the commercial sector. But at the moment today, it certainly seems that given the relatively high rate of interest, the high property tax burden we have, in various economies in various areas of the country, increased insurance costs of ownership, that, the incidences of younger people buying versus renting has certainly declined. So we have a great stimulus in the rental sector. And if you can be in a market where you have limited supply growth and positive rent growth, then you've got a winning formula. So here we are, we're in West Palm Beach. We're in probably one of the more dynamic, growing office sectors in the nation. We've got enormous population growth into the Palm Beach County market. And we've also had a tremendous increase in the median household income. So all those factors and a limited supply of new inventory. Miami has had a very large supply increase. West Palm has very limited supply growth increase. And we've had significant increases year over year in market rental rates. All of those factors have converged into a place where we were very, very, high in the West Palm market. And we just happened to have a site here in town that we had rezoned, or 240 apartment units, which we are currently developing. And we have 2 other sites in mind that we're looking for development opportunities here. So we really would like to plant a flag here in a big way in the West Palm market and targeting around 1,000 multifamily units over the next couple of years. That's kind of our short-term goal. We see that as achievable, and we see that as a really good, a good place to be given all these positive economic factors.
Love it. So you've said in the past that value investing means being able to write a check quickly. What does quickly mean in this environment, and what's stopping most people from moving that fast right now, Mitchell?
I think you and I had spoken, and I mentioned to you that, in previous very opportunistic transactions, especially in the note purchasing space, where we did not necessarily buy the property, but we bought the mortgage in default, and then we acquire the property from the owner. Those are examples of an extreme example where you would need to put up a deposit and close within 15 days, all cash. So those are, deeply discounted, highly opportunistic, very, very high return, risk and return deal. And in the structuring of it, if you can cobble together, a partner group or have your own dry powder and you can execute on a note purchase, you're going to get a fantastic buy and then enable you to kind of get the deed from the owner and in turn make a lot of money. That's an extreme example. But, in the other sector, the normal conventional space, you're putting up a meaningful deposit, 5% deposit, 3% deposit on contract, and sellers want you to go hard in 30 days with your deposit and close in another 15. If you can distinguish yourself from the competition and perform faster, inherently your perception of risk is lower, so you should be able to get a better price. Now, the question for the investor is, can I line up my capital partners and my capital to perform that quickly? Can I close in 45 days? Can I get my lenders on board? What are those dynamics and how do we make this transaction work? That's where the challenges kind of come in.
Got it. Makes sense. Quick question. Your hotel company, you sold it to the Pritzkers in 2011. What did that deal teach you, Mitchell, that you still use? And what would you do differently if you were negotiating that deal today?
Well, that was a transaction where I was a partner in some of the hotels that were involved in that transaction. And, I think the lesson there learned that, hotels in general are being aggregated. There's been a lot of more capital market transactions in the hotel space than necessarily individual hotels. So you see a lot of positive equity multiples in the public market versus the private market. So a lot of the hotel companies out there are looking to bulk up their portfolio and, mostly get into the management business versus the hard equity business, the hard asset business. And once you've accumulated enough assets as a manager, the best place to move yourself is from private capital to the public markets. The public markets tend to value hotel management contracts much more aggressively than the private market. So that was something that came out of that certainly seemed to be an interesting transaction. And we're seeing that now in other sectors. I mean, the people at the Blackstone Group, they don't buy a property, they buy a company because they can take the company from private to public. So it's that was one lesson I learned there that I think was very helpful. And ultimately, the Pritzkers who own Hyatt put that asset that was sold along with that other big company asset together, and then they spun it off into a public company that's now part of the Hyatt family. So, for them, this was, a very efficient, ingenious transaction.
Got it. And you were part of that. Boy, I tell you, isn't it amazing? Even at this point, you still learn something on every deal.
Oh, without a doubt. Every deal is different. You learn every time. Just 2 weeks ago, I closed a loan with one of the big Wall Street shops, and there was a lot of learning that went on there up until the 11th hour and up until the closing. So a lot of techniques of negotiation and wit were required to navigate those shark-filled waters of late. There's just a myriad of issues that you deal with in every transaction. So it's safe to say that every deal is a learning process.
Well, here's a question that just came up for me. Was there anybody that you look up to as a master negotiator, or any book or something that or a class or a professor early in your career that is your sort of go-to on how to deal with negotiations?
I have a partner now that I admire very much. I've been working with them for 20 years, and Mike Pomerantz is a very dear friend, and his skills of negotiating are unending. So I've learned a lot from watching Michael over the years. There's different ways of negotiating with people. There's a soft approach, and then there's, approach where you wear them down. You have 10 issues, you get 8, you lose 2, and then you go back 5 more, and you just keep the negotiating going until you get everything you want. That's one technique. And other ways, you just have a long view in business. And my partner, Ron, who's been one of my best investors for 20 years, he's got a very, very great business view of things, and he has a 10,000-foot perspective that I think is very, very pragmatic. And both of these gentlemen have taught me a lot over the years. But I will tell you, interesting, many years ago when I was a kid working in public accounting, we had a large pension fund client that was investing in one of the large funds in New York City, one of these large opportunity funds. And I had the chance to work with the operators of this fund, understanding all the assets they had acquired on behalf of this particular institutional investor. And the gentleman who was running the fund at the time was a man named Bill Mack, and of Mack family. One of the brightest men I had ever met. At the time, this was again 25 years ago, he was discussing what they were doing as a strategic direction for the fund. And he was one of the first people that let me understand that they were literally straddling the private equity markets, the public equity markets, the private debt markets, and the public debt markets. And I could see from his discussions that they had bought a company that was a multifamily syndicator as a private company. They then delevered it and went public, and they made a lot of money doing it. And then 2 years later, the cost of debt went way down, and they took the company private again and levered up. And in so doing, with doing nothing to the real estate, they had made 30 or 40% return on their money.
Wow.
So that was an eye-opening experience, realizing that, by virtue of just straddling the private and public market space with large asset pools, you can make a lot of money without doing the hard work, which is knocking down walls, putting up,
Right.
interior fixtures,
Right.
and all the stuff that we take for granted is what you got to do, right?
Right. Well, that's into there's your analog physical world where there's
That's
all
right.
kinds of challenges. These guys were in this digital space where they were able
That's
to
right.
move stuff back and forth and get that 30, 40% return.
Exactly.
So then that leads me here, Mitchell. Where are you at with AI? What was your aha moment? Like, when did you first kind of go, oh my God, this is something? And when was that? Let's start with that question.
Well, probably about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and just using the tools that we use here every day. We're in a Microsoft environment using their tools and analytics and AIs. So, we were kind of, culling information, data, if you would, comp data, lease data, and they were able to kind of cipher that data through models that were part of the applications that we were using, whether it was a CoStar or whether it was a search engine. It started to make our job a lot easier. It made it so we didn't have to physically go out and inventory things. We could literally do a custom search and get a sort out of the data tools. So that was definitely a refreshing eye opener. And probably beginning about a year or so ago, even as mundane as, all of our conference calls and all of our meetings that we're having, we have an AI tool that shows up that records the entire conversation and then spits back, a synopsis of the meeting, any follow-up items and the like. So that's been kind of very important because, since the advent of COVID, where we have lots of, Zoom calls and team calls, we're constantly, online, if you would, and having meetings. That type of an application became very helpful to us to be able to manage our schedules. And then of late, there's been a lot of, tool writers that literally attach themselves to all of our documents that will cipher through and rewrite documents for clarity and for punctuation and help us present the information in a much more succinct and cogent fashion. From a real estate analytics standpoint, similarly, there are new models that have been built out of Excel that are, 15-page lapped page data that you can upload the information from your database, and it'll cipher through the model and give you some form of an analytic analysis of returns and the like. And that is also, I would think, a significant change as well. So again, data tools, search engines, just our ability to do work on a day in and day out basis has been, somewhat made more efficient by AI.
So it's interesting. I'm hearing a lot of operational time savings, right? You kind of got in, you went, wow, this used to take us 5 hours. Now it takes 10 minutes or whatever that is. So That's like a wow.
Yep.
This is what I'm curious about. Really, where I see it going, Mitchell, there's going to be AI native companies. There's going to be companies that start today that it's agentic from day one, right? Like their whole business model is an AI. But then companies like yours that have been around that are transitioning from digital to AI forward, that includes bringing people along. That includes changing a culture. That includes having somebody within your organization own that, right? Who's owning those workflows?
Absolutely.
Who's implementing it? What should you implement? How do you put guardrails around that? I mean, there's a lot of sensitive financial information. So I'm just curious, like within your organization, have those conversations been had? Like, hey, how are we going to formalize? Because the stuff's never going to be any less efficient than it is today. And the capabilities are so overwhelming in terms of strategic and marketing and sales and all of it.
Right.
So how are you guys thinking about that piece of it?
Well, fortunately, I always try to hire young, smart, interns and people that are coming out of, especially the Columbia program, that are well trained. And I find that institutions and colleges are much more, aggressive in teaching analytical tools, especially Excel modeling and presentation materials, and doing so efficiently by using AI. So, with the younger generation comes that into our culture. So, we've hired, 3 or 4 people in the last few years that brought with them kind of the latest in analytical AI tools. And we've managed to be able to incorporate that into our daily life, which has been very helpful. And I think it's all about making our workspace more efficient and in making our work environment, easier to manage so we can look at more deals and analyze what makes sense. I always jokingly say, if I have a problem with my iPhone, I'm going to call a 13-year-old to fix it because they know better than I. And in a weird way, having a 28-year-old coming out of one of the programs that have been indoctrinated with the latest in AI efficiency tools is certainly a great way to incorporate them into our practice.
Yeah, and I love that. Let me get your read on this. 2 or 3 years from now, when you're hiring someone, if they're not AI fluent, if they're not able to come in and say, in my last company, I created X amount of value by deploying this agentic workflow. This is a marketing channel that I opened up. This was a strategic partner that I created. Are they going to be hired if they're not have that proficiency?
I agree with their statement. I mean, up until 2 years ago, if they were not very heavily Excel proficient,
Correct.
it was not a good match. That was a key requirement for any of our new hires. They had to understand Excel. And if they did not, we would recommend that they take, an Excel proficiency class. And now they're taking Excel AI modeling classes because they have to be able to use the AI tools inside of Excel to do the proper analytics. So I would definitely say within the next, few years that it is an essential tool, an essential skill set for young graduates to understand, AI as it pertains to financial analytics, presentation materials, putting together some form of a paper on something. It's going to become an essential tool because without it, you're going to fall behind. And it's the same dynamic if you walked into an organization and didn't know Excel and you were, an analyst, you're just not going to get that position. We used to sit kids down and say, show me you can create a model of this. And if you can't, well, maybe you need to get some remedial lessons on it. And I think that may come to a point where you'll be asked to show how to utilize certain AI tools.
Or I think you'll be asked to show what use cases you've created for yourself. And let me throw another one out at you. We're just spitballing here, Mitchell. Yeah. The jobs of the future will be value-based, not salary-based.
Look, in the world we live in, and this has been the case for some time, there are revenue center people and there are cost center people. And I learned this at a very young age. I was lucky to be a revenue center person who was bringing business in. And I was managing the business and being a profit center. And I had a very different compensation structure and had a very different promotion schedule than the people that were, cost center people. They were the accounting back office, the marketing packaging person, the essential but not essential who are paid a salary to come in. They got, cost of living adjustments year after year. They didn't get the big leaps in compensation. And I definitely know that that's the world that we've come from. And today we live in a world in business where you eat what you kill. All right. Old expression from a brokerage perspective. And, again, people who can make things happen, are highly valued. And people that are there to help with the process are going to be, are going to get left behind.
Well, let me ask you, I'm sure you've heard about this, but I just want to throw this out there. So there's a lot of private equity firms that are putting together $6 or $10 billion, let's say, and they're going to go out and buy all the mom and pop CPAs, right? So you got a guy who maybe his son is working there and he's got 85 businesses that he's done their books forever. It's the diner and the, small landlord. They're going to go in, buy these up, employ forward deployed engineers, go in and really create a workflow where you can get one or two accountants that can do the work of 8 or 9, and then package that and turn it around and sell it. They're starting with the big ones first. Would you ever see if they had someone that could come into your organization and look at every workflow from top to bottom and basically recommend a blueprint for how to become the most AI forward organization in terms of time savings, return on investment, et cetera? Is that something that you think you would let in the door or be interested in?
Sure. I mean, the conversation started off with the idea of a roll up and got into, does the AI allow my organization to be more cost efficient and maybe not have to be subject to the roll up? I don't know. But I think it's going to evolve over time. The tools that are available today are, again, as we started the conversation, I can't take my AI robot to a building and say, what do you think, pal?
Right.
What do you think about the mechanical system here? And what do you think about the elevators? And what do you think about the mechanicals in the building? And is this a building that's going to need to get stripped out and redone, or can I work with what I got? Those are things that I need to know. As I alluded in this discussion, there are tools today that we've rolled out in a workforce setting that have certainly made our easier. And I definitely see the big evolution here from the financial analyst's perspective, the people that work for private equity who are looking at deals, and whether it's buying a esoteric piece of CMBS or B piece or God knows what it could be in that world, to buying a building or a piece of a partnership. All of those analytical tools are going to be built on an AI platform very shortly. And I think that's going to be something that is going to have to, be considered. The old dinosaurs who create a little model and do all this thing, I think that's going to make it harder for people to keep up. So I do think it's going to be in the analytical tool area. And I keep saying Excel because that's the primary use of primary modeling these days. There are other models that we use to run lease by lease analysis, a program called Argus. But once that Argus is set, we take the data over to the Excel and we run capital and sensitivities through there. And we come up with, the answer, which is, am I going to make money on this deal? And will my partners make money? And can I sell this thing to the capital markets? So that's really that's when the rubber meets the road. We can sit here and talk about it and how great this deal is, but unless the money shows up, there's not going to be a party. There'll be a beer, a keg, and some red cups, and that's about it.
And maybe a bag of Lay's potato chips.
Exactly. That's
exactly.
Right. Yeah, we want the champagne and we want the caviar.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, Mitchell, let me ask you a question as we wrap it up here. What did you love about this business when you started, and what still fires you up? What do you love about doing it now?
Yeah, when I had this question asked of me not too long ago, and I have to say, the thing I love about the real estate business is I don't have to sit there and worry about minute by minute motions of the Dow Jones and the S&P and the bond market. I have a longer perspective on my investment class. I'm managing the asset. I have a plan, and as long as I have a good plan, I stick to the plan. And if there are things that have to be changed or deviated, we do that. So, there's that aspect of real estate, which, is great. And I also candidly love, negotiating. All I do day in and day out is I negotiate leases with tenants. I negotiate financing with lenders and various parties. I negotiate with partners to make sure that we're doing what we have to do. Every day is filled with a lot of negotiations. And that to me is a lot of fun. So if you're the type of person who can multitask and doesn't get bored, wants to not be bored and working on 14 things at the same time, well, there's no better space to be in than real estate. And again, from my perspective, I own assets. They're long-term assets. I own these things, some cases 20 plus years. It's nice to be an owner of buildings. I walk into my buildings, and whether they're an office building or a shopping center or a hotel or an apartment building, and it's nice to employ the people that are there. I don't walk in like I'm the landlord. I really,
Right.
It's a team, and I enjoy everyone who works with me. I've given many people, dozens of people, a leg up in life and an opportunity to work with us, to do good things and empower them. And to me, that's very rewarding. I enjoy the people who work for me. We have a bond. They're your team, they're your family, and that's important. So I like that about
Yeah,
it.
listen, at the end of the day, Mitchell, when all is said and done, it is always about people. It really is. And I mean, you working with your son at Columbia, I'm sure there's nothing more fun than that for you to show up and enjoy his company and have you guys rock.
What's better than that than laying your class of 25 years off on your offspring? So, but he's a tremendous co-professor and a program graduate, and has really inspired lots of people. And again, Columbia is a fantastic place that we can inspire young people, to achieve their goals in real estate development. And I find that to be, again, very rewarding. So.
Mitchell, man, this was a great conversation. I appreciate you jumping on and having this conversation. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, certainly. Our company is Capstone Realty Group. It's crgre.com. And certainly they could see our portfolio there and send us an email to that venue. It comes to info@crgre.com. And I'll be happy to make sure we respond to anyone if there's any questions about what we do. And, I've had many of my Columbia students bring me deals, and I've done those transactions, and benefited them or helped them get deals done. It's a small community of real estate people, and we're all kind of out here just a bunch of squirrels trying to get a nut, as they say.
Thank you for watching Real Estate Rewired, AI with Heart. Mitchell, thank you so much for being the guest. Please subscribe. If you're interested in being on the show, please DM me. And thanks again for watching.